In the veteran war correspondent Arwa Damon now, who's been on our program a number of times here in recent months. Her organization INARA, the International Network for Aid, Relief and Assistance. You might remember she was in Gaza not too long ago as part of her work with that organization. Joins us now from her home in Istanbul, Turkey. I want to ask you about some developments with that country in a moment, but reaction first to what Robert is reporting on and has been throughout the week about whether or not we're going to get finally some sort of a ceasefire. It seemed like people were getting their hopes up. What do you think?
They are, and in this context, especially if you're Gazan, hope can be so cruel, especially because it's been dashed so many times before. But Connor, I can tell you if there's one thing that Gazans want right now, and one thing only, it's just for this to end. They don't care about the details at this stage. They just want it over. They want the drones to stop buzzing. They want the bombings to stop. They want to stop losing people who they love. They want to be able to at least start to visualize what's going to happen next. And you also have to remember that for them, it's not just about these immediate ceasefire talks, right? There's also still, even if there is a temporary ceasefire, this continuous threat that's coming from the Israeli government that no matter what, this Rafah invasion is still going to happen. And so it's just this crazy roller coaster of emotions for them right now.
To that exact point, when the Secretary of State was over in the region, Antony Blinken, he was asked and talked about the possibility of exactly what you're talking about, that Netanyahu's going into Rafah no matter what. Here's what he said.
On Rafah itself, look, our position is clear. It hasn't changed. It won't change. We will not support a major military operation in Rafah absent an effective plan to make sure that civilians are not harmed. And no, we have not seen such a plan.
I'm not sure what that means, though, that the U.S. won't support it.
That's exactly what I was wondering listening to his rhetoric, because what does that mean? I mean, does that mean that the U.S. will threaten to or actually cut off the weapons supply, decrease its funding? I mean, at this stage, that's the big concern, right? Is that no matter what we've been hearing from the U.S. side, it has just been rhetoric. And the U.S. has in the past, we've seen this already, repeatedly said, Israel should not be doing this. Israel needs to decrease the number of civilian casualties, et cetera, and nothing has really changed on the ground.
I mentioned you're in Turkey, and so I did want to ask you about this headline came out today that Turkey is halting its trade with Israel, but, I guess because of the humanitarian situation. This is the headline from the New York Times, but late Thursday, they've halted all trade until the uninterrupted and adequate humanitarian aid is allowed into Gaza. So this relationship, I guess, has been getting worse anyway between these two countries, but is this significant?
It potentially could be, especially if other countries sort of follow suit to a certain degree. One also needs to take into consideration where, if I'm not mistaken, Turkey is either number 6 or 7 when it comes to trade partners with Israel. So there's a pretty robust amount, of money and trade that goes back and forth between both countries. To be frank, when I did see that headline, my first reaction was that I was fairly surprised that it took Turkey this long to try to, twist this particular pressure point. And perhaps this could lead to other countries in the region who do have economic ties with Israel at this point to also follow suit. It's also interesting because, Turkey doing this is not necessarily because Turkey is capitulating per se to public pressure. There is one thing that's interesting over here when it comes to Turkey in particular, and that is that the Turkish government and the Turkish public are pretty much, seeing eye to eye when it comes to this desire to see an end to the killing in Gaza.
Hey, final thing, Arwa, before we let you go, I'm curious to get your own perspective on these college campus protests, looking in from overseas at the United States. We have live video coming in, I believe from MIT, Cambridge, Massachusetts, but we've seen protesters, spreading from campus to campus. Every day it seems to be a new school. What's the view, even your own view and also the view from overseas? I'm sure people are watching this, right?
Oh, they're watching it so closely. It's just about anything that anyone really talks about. And it's quite interesting because you do get a sense that, people here in the Middle East wish that they could have done this, wish that they could have done more. And one has to, remember that demonstrating in this part of the world does not happen as easily as it does in the United States, per se. And there were demonstrations coming out, against the war in its very early weeks that got very quickly squashed by respective governments, except for, it's worth saying, here in Turkey. And you get the sense that, yes, there's this level of gratitude that, U.S. students are kind of carrying the torch on this one, and there's an appreciation of that. But there's also a little bit of, shame and angst that they themselves are not able to be as vocal as Americans are right now. And it does sort of, cause this conversation about how the fact that, there is so much criticism and so much frustration and anger towards the U.S. government, and yet this understanding that the U.S. government is not necessarily the voice of the American people.
Thanks so much for watching. Just go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.